Please rewind this cassette.
My name is Steve Spielberg, and I just directed a movie called Jaws, and Jaws is about to be nominated in 11 categories. You're about to see us sweep the nominations. We're very confident at this very moment, and so if you all have a seat, we'll get on with it.
And Milos Forman.
Oh, I didn't get it. I didn't get it. I wasn't nominated. I got beaten out by Fellini.
Saul Bain and Michael Douglas produced.
Well, I have it, Regis. Interesting.
I have something to say. I have a lot to say. First of all,
These are my spokesmen.
First of all, being the first Godfather, I have this to say. The Godfather was nominated for the Best Picture and won, but the director, Bob Fosse of Cabaret, won. That's bullshit. You cannot have the Best Picture unless the director is also nominated. Who made the picture?
What?
Let's hear it.
Only for what?
Best picture, best editing, best score, and sound. And
That's it?
We named
Best
every-
screenplay?
Not special effects.
Not even special effects? This is called commercial backlash.
You know, throughout the years, there's been a sentiment that the blockbusters of the 1970s killed the artistic revolution that was the new Hollywood movement. Now, this is often credited to Jaws and Star Wars, but I ask, what started the blockbuster?
You heard him. Slow ahead.
Now, I know that everyone does like to say it was Spielberg and Lucas. They defined the opening weekend, the movies that influenced and changed everything that would become 80s cinema. But is this actually true? When I go back and look at the box office results for films that predate Jaws, I see a lot of stuff that I would personally call a blockbuster. The Graduate, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and Love Story were all huge hits several years before Jaws even came out. Then you have movies like Godfather, Exorcist, and The Sting breaking box office records before the shark was even in the water. So was it because Jaws was such a success? Or is it the formula of the movie itself that people are talking about? This is often used as an attack, not on the films themselves, but the impact that Spielberg and Lucas had on the industry. This was the death of the film brats, and people were tired of the cynicism featured throughout the films at the time. People wanted to leave the theater happy and caught up in the awe of being taken away to a new world. But is Jaws really that happy of a movie? I mean, sure, they blow the shark up in the end, but Quint gets brutally killed by the very monster that's haunted him for years. We see the death of a child, and we also see the corruption of the town leaders who value money over the lives of their citizens. I don't think it's that happy of a movie. Okay, well, what about Rocky? Isn't that the crowd-pleasing film that set up the success of Star Wars? See, Rocky came out in 1976, and with all the odds stacked against Stallone and the movie, sort of like the lead character, Rocky went on to make over $100 million at the domestic box office and won Best Picture over masterpieces like Network, Taxi Driver, and All the President's Men. Wouldn't it be fair to say that Rocky was the film that kicked off the crowd-pleasing blockbuster that we know today? But even still, Rocky's still very much a 70s movie. Gritty, character-driven, and taking its time to allow slower moments for the story to take center stage over any kind of set piece. Alright, so it's gotta be motherfucking Star Wars. That isn't a new Hollywood movie, right? Lucas wasn't making some big-budget art film. Or was he? When you think about him as the guy who made THX 1138 and American Graffiti, it's pretty crazy that he made the leap forward to making the biggest film of all time. I mean, is he really doing something that much different from Francis Ford Coppola with The Godfather? Originally, Coppola didn't even want to make that movie, but was convinced to by Lucas in order to make enough money so they can continue to fund their own personal projects. So while taking the format of classic gangster movies, Coppola then reinvented and perfected it within 70s method acting and Shakespearean overtones. Well, really, when you look at Star Wars, Lucas is just taking classic westerns, Kurosawa films, comic book, pulp novels, and fantasy into an era with more modern special effects and film editing. I have a theory that because Star Wars was such a big deal, bigger than one film or even Lucas himself, people no longer see New Hope as a 70s film. We don't even call it Star Wars, it's always A New Hope. But it's just another film that's part of this franchise now that includes everything. Another piece of merchandise, another thread of a sweater that is the capitalist juggernaut of Star Wars. But this isn't really fair to that first movie. And if you view it as a film that came out in 1977, it's just honestly one of the most impressive and great movies of that decade. It's not only one of the greatest technical breakthroughs of all time, but it stands with many of the classics of that decade, featuring a pace and storytelling coherence that feels completely state-of-the-art for that time. I mean, it's crazy that a film feels that huge and looks that good when it did. Just movies didn't look that good in 1977. Is it such a bad thing that out of all the film brats, George Lucas was the one that turned his influence into the most popular movie ever? You know, for me, the moment when Star Wars really becomes that movie is when Han and Luke go save Leia on the Death Star. When the trio finally gets together, all of a sudden the pacing of the movie and the performances from the three leads just gets more natural and fun. We spend so much of the movie before that focusing on world building and lore that it can honestly feel like the world's biggest nerd playing with his toys. That's not a bad thing in and itself, but for me, the movie doesn't really become great until the gang gets together and it turns into more of a chase movie. It's now when Star Wars feels like classic Kurosawa, or The Wizard of Oz, or Lord of the Rings. It's now when the young actors, not the veterans like Peter Cushing and Alec Guinness, start to take command of the screen and play off each other with just amazing timing and charisma. It's almost a magic trick in a sense. Like you don't realize that up until this point the movie has been setting you up for the real adventure. As the movie goes along, it gets better. And by the third act, you're not only fully invested in the rebels versus the Empire, but you almost jump out of your seat when Han shows up to save Luke. It feels earned, and it's all been done with such an elegant craftsmanship by Lucas and his special effects team. How can it all be so seamless? Lucas does a lot of clever things too, like designing the film to have few costume changes in order to save money and to avoid continuity errors. For the most part, Han, Leia, and Luke wear the same outfits throughout most of the film. The same goes for Darth Vader and the Stormtroopers. You know, it's little things like this that you don't think about when you watch Star Wars, but it's all part of its appeal. Now let's go back to Jaws. Sometimes I think people act as if this was Steven Spielberg's first movie or something, but before Jaws he directed the fantastic movie Duel, and a completely overlooked gem of a movie called The Sugarland Express. Now go back and watch those movies. The horror and suspense of Jaws isn't much different from the killer truck in Duel, and the sense of Americana mixed with compelling character relationships is featured heavily in Sugarland. Jaws really feels like those two movies combined. Then Spielberg followed up Jaws with Close Encounters, another very successful movie, which, looking back on it, feels like the biggest art house film ever made outside of maybe 2001: A Space Odyssey. So it's not like either filmmaker sold out after finding financial success with their individual hits. Lucas used the money from Star Wars to work as independently outside of the studio system as he possibly could, living the dream of making projects that he wanted to without anybody telling him what to do. Okay, so maybe it was Raiders of the Lost Ark. That's what killed movies. That's the one that I think influenced movies to be more about set pieces than narrative. But even with that, should we criticize Spielberg for masterfully cutting together a series of action scenes? Creating a template of a non-stop entertainment that we still see in the blockbusters of today? It's not like North by Northwest and the James Bond movies weren't doing this years before Indiana Jones was a thing. Okay, so did Lucas and Spielberg really kill the New Hollywood movement? Or were they just part of it? Well, then who did kill the New Hollywood movement? Was it the audiences? Did people speak with their wallets when they chose to see movies like E.T. over Blade Runner? I don't really know if there is a definitive answer. I've read books on this and heard many scholars debate on what exactly caused the change from the character-driven dramas of the 70s to the spectacle-driven movies of the 1980s. You also have to factor in that tracking the box office for films that came out before the mid-70s is really difficult. There's some films that I've spent years trying to find the actual number of ticket sales for. They also used to re-release movies a lot more too, because the cinema was still the dominant way to watch a new movie. My father used to tell me how he would see movies in the theater and walk out thinking about how he would probably never see them again. This was before HBO and home video that got so popular in the 1980s. Could you imagine walking out of The Godfather and thinking you can watch it whenever you want? I think it's safe to say that we take this for granted in a world where we can watch whatever we want. Sometimes instead of watching a movie, I just look up my favorite scenes on YouTube and replay them a dozen times. I mean, sometimes I just look up scenes to feel a certain emotion. If I want to cry, if I want to laugh, I just find a clip of something and I don't actually sit down and watch the movie. I remember as a kid, I would fast forward or rewind my VHS tapes to get to the scenes I really wanted to see a lot of the time. Now I wonder if micro-watching is the way most people consume media in 2020. It's like chasing the high of that emotion that a scene gives you. Be it looking up the things that are funny, or badass, or cool, or even looking up the stuff to remind you of a certain feeling. Why do I go out of my way to watch stuff that makes me feel bad? Is it the same thing as looking up something to make me feel happy? It's like I'm using parts of the movies to relive memories, or to remind myself of how I used to feel about something. So that's it. Nostalgia. Is that what it's all really about? Lucas captured nostalgia in American Graffiti, nostalgia for the early 60s and a simpler time before the Vietnam War. He just took it to the next level with Star Wars. He gave people the nostalgia of the wonder in childhood, believing anything is possible, and we're all heroes waiting to be taken on some magical quest to save a princess with our wizard behind us. I guess what I'm getting at is, people often talk about these movies as not as part of the overall experience of the 1970s, but more as pieces of pop culture that transcend the 70s, that are great despite being made in a galaxy a long time ago, far, far away. But I'm here to say the opposite. These films aren't great because they kicked off the modern-day blockbuster and lead us to the world of Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, and the MCU. They're great because they are from the 70s, and they share qualities of all the films and the filmmakers I've discussed in my series so far. Part of the reason that they are so special is that they weren't made with the knowledge of the money they would end up making and the franchises they would create. Spielberg and Lucas, like Scorsese, Coppola, De Palma, David Lynch, and every great young artist of that time, were making films with a vast knowledge of the history and great work that came before them. They were artists, and no matter the negative or positive impact of those movies, they remain great works of art and essential movies of the best decade for film. 70s Rewind wouldn't be complete without mentioning them. And instead of giving them their own video essays, which, what's the point when half of all video essays on YouTube are about Jaws and Star Wars? I've even been in a couple of them. I decided to make this video to say that not only do I love them as great big budget escapist entertainment, but that I also love them as brilliantly written and directed masterpieces. Because that's what they are. That is to say, Jaws and Star Wars didn't kill the New Hollywood movement. If anything, they just took it to the next level. And I think a lot of people haven't been able to process that, and I think there's a lot of insecurity and jealousy all going in with it. The only thing that really sucks is that the industry was really never able to live up to it, to that standard that was set by them.
I don't know if anybody knows the word commercial backlash, but when a film makes a lot of money, people resent it. Everybody loves a winner, but nobody loves a winner.